one of the most prominent Republican lawmakers, passed away last night at the age of 71. Initial findings show Graham died from an aorta rupture connected to hardening of the arteries.
Two major wars are already consuming the world's attention. Russia's war in Ukraine has shown no signs of slowing down, while the recent conflict involving Iran has pushed the Middle East to the brink of a much wider regional confrontation. At home, President Donald Trump is facing growing political pressure and slipping approval ratings. At the same time, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's prolonged absence has also fueled online calls demanding proof that he is even alive.
I don't know another person who spent his entire adult life for one purpose: to make sure America remained the safest country on the planet to live.
The death of 71-year-old Lindsey Graham could not have come at a worse time. In fact, he even joked about how he did not have time to die. But then, shortly afterward, he did. So, what really did happen to him, and was there any foul play? Well, Lindsey Graham's escort has finally revealed the shocking secrets about him. A senator walks into a war zone, then dies hours later. On the 10th of July, 2026, Senator Lindsey Graham stepped into Kyiv at one of the most dangerous moments of the war. The previous night, Russia had launched another massive aerial assault, firing 6 Iskander-M and S-400 ballistic missiles, 4 Kh-59/69 cruise missiles, 2 K-31 anti-radiation missiles, and 121 Shahed, Gerbera, Atalmas, and decoy drones at targets across Ukraine. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 111 drones and 2 cruise missiles, but strikes still landed in 11 locations, hitting residential neighborhoods, railway infrastructure, ports, hospitals, farms, and businesses across Kyiv, Odessa, Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, and Kherson. In Sumy alone, Russian-guided bombs killed 5 civilians and wounded at least 30, including children. This was in response to Ukraine's long-range strike campaign deep inside Russia. Around the time of Graham's visit, Ukrainian forces reported attacks on a Russian drone command post in Belgorod Oblast, troop concentrations in Kursk Oblast, military positions in occupied Crimea, and infrastructure supporting Russia's war effort. At sea, Ukraine claimed strikes on 18 Russian vessels in the Sea of Azov, including 10 oil tankers, as part of what Kyiv called its campaign against Russia's shadow fleet. Days later, Ukraine would also launch one of its largest drone raids toward Moscow. The war was heating up, and Graham wanted to deliver a bigger blow to Russia through sanctions. As one of the U.S. Senate's most outspoken supporters of Ukraine, he set foot in the country, determined to reinforce Washington's commitment. The timing alone made the visit significant. Graham's schedule left little doubt about the purpose of the trip. He met personally with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, held discussions with senior government officials, and visited facilities connected to Ukraine's rapidly expanding defense industry, including drone production. Ukraine's drone program had become one of its most effective weapons during the war, enabling strikes against military airfields, logistics hubs, and energy infrastructure hundreds of kilometers inside Russian territory. Standing beside Graham after their meeting, Zelensky praised the senator's unwavering support, writing afterward that Ukraine was grateful for Lindsey Graham's leadership and determination to stand with our people. Images from the visit showed Graham walking confidently, smiling, shaking hands, and appearing fully engaged throughout the tour. The senator was hardly there for ceremonial diplomacy. Graham promoted bipartisan legislation he had been developing with Senator Richard Blumenthal that aimed to impose the toughest economic penalties yet on Russia. The proposal targeted countries continuing to purchase Russian oil, gas, and uranium by threatening tariffs of up to 500%, a measure Graham believed could dramatically reduce Moscow's ability to finance the war. "The hammer is about to fall," Graham declared while discussing the sanctions package, expressing confidence that Congress would soon move forward. For Moscow, which had already placed Graham on its wanted list and routinely portrayed him as one of Washington's leading Russophobes, his latest visit reinforced his reputation as one of the Kremlin's most determined political adversaries. Interestingly, nothing about Graham's public appearances suggested a man in declining health. After leaving Ukraine, Graham returned to Washington and resumed his political schedule almost immediately. According to President Donald Trump, the two spoke by telephone on the evening before Graham died. Trump later recalled that Graham sounded completely normal and was excited about the sanctions legislation following his Kyiv trip. He was at the top of his game, Trump said afterward, adding that Graham had been discussing Russia, Ukraine, and the next steps in Congress with characteristic enthusiasm. Only hours after that phone call, Graham was found unresponsive at his Washington residence. His office announced that the senator had died, following what it described only as a brief and sudden illness. But did he? Naturally, the timing has fueled rumors. Did Russia assassinate one of the most pressing Russophobes in Washington? Well, let's get one thing clear first. Even if that is the case, neither side will acknowledge. But we can still look up all the facts. His escorts finally reveal the shocking secrets about his last hours. Investigators have reconstructed Graham's last known movements through the people who spent time with him during his final day. The longest, and perhaps most important encounter came in Kyiv, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spent several hours with Graham during the senator's visit on July 10, 2026. The two met privately before appearing together publicly, discussing the battlefield situation, military assistance, sanctions, and Ukraine's growing domestic defense industry. Graham also toured facilities involved in drone production, an increasingly important part of Ukraine's strategy against Russia. Official photographs and video from the visit show him walking normally, shaking hands, smiling, and speaking confidently throughout the day. After Graham's death, Zelensky paid tribute, saying, "Ukraine has lost a true friend." He added that Graham had always stood firmly with our country and our people. Notably, neither Zelensky nor any Ukrainian official mentioned observing health problems during the visit. There was no concern whatsoever. One of Graham's last extended conversations on camera came shortly afterward with CBS News moderator Margaret Brennan. The interview focused almost entirely on foreign policy. Graham enthusiastically discussed a bipartisan sanctions proposal he had co-sponsored with Senator Richard Blumenthal, arguing that the United States was preparing to impose unprecedented economic pressure on countries continuing to purchase Russian energy exports. Speaking confidently, Graham declared, "The hammer is about to fall." Viewers watching the interview after his death searched for clues that something might have been wrong. They found little. His speech was clear, his responses were immediate, and his demeanor closely matched the forceful style that had characterized his public appearances for decades. After returning to Washington, Graham also had a telephone conversation with President Donald Trump. Trump later revealed that the two had spoken on the evening before Graham's death, discussing Ukraine, sanctions, and upcoming legislative priorities. Recalling the call, Trump said Graham sounded completely normal and remained deeply engaged with his work. Nothing about the conversation suggested an impending medical emergency. Graham never complained of severe chest pain, back pain, dizziness, weakness, or confusion. No one has publicly stated that he appeared exhausted or physically distressed during his meetings or while traveling. No aide has described a gradual deterioration over the course of the day because there was no such thing. He appeared perfectly healthy. When Graham's office announced that he had died following a brief and sudden illness, the lack of detail immediately fueled speculation online. Days later, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner released its preliminary finding that Graham had suffered an acute aortic dissection associated with arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, while emphasizing that toxicology and microscopic examinations were still pending before issuing a final death certificate. Cardiologists note that an acute aortic dissection can, in rare cases, cause a person who appears healthy to collapse within minutes as the inner wall of the aorta tears, disrupting blood flow and leading to catastrophic internal bleeding. At the same time, Graham's death occurred immediately after a highly publicized visit to a war zone, meetings with President Zelensky, tours of sensitive military facilities, and renewed calls for harsher sanctions against Russia. Coincidence? Many say no. The senator who made powerful enemies everywhere. Lindsey Graham's death triggered an immediate wave of speculation, but not simply because of where he had been. It was also because of who he had become over the course of nearly 3 decades in the U.S. Senate. Few American politicians had accumulated as many powerful foreign adversaries. No country viewed Graham with more hostility than Russia. Following Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Graham transformed into one of the Senate's most outspoken advocates for military aid to Kyiv. He repeatedly described Russian President Vladimir Putin as a war criminal and insisted that the conflict should end with a decisive Russian defeat. In one of his most controversial statements, posted on social media in March 2022, Graham declared, "Is there a Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military?" He continued, "The only way this ends is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out." The remarks sparked international headlines, with critics accusing Graham of openly calling for Putin's assassination. Graham later clarified that he was speaking metaphorically about regime change from within Russia. But the damage had been done. Russia's response was swift and sustained. In May 2023, after Graham remarked during another visit to Ukraine that the Russians are dying and described American military assistance as the best money we've ever spent, Russia's Interior Ministry issued a criminal warrant for his arrest. The Kremlin demanded an investigation, while Russian officials condemned Graham as one of the most extreme American Russophobes. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova called his comments shameful, and former President Dmitry Medvedev repeatedly singled him out in public statements. Yet Moscow was hardly the only capital where Graham's name drew strong reactions. For decades, Iran had regarded him as one of the U.S. Senate's most consistently hawkish voices. Long before the 2026 confrontation between Washington and Tehran, Graham had advocated a far more aggressive American posture toward the Islamic Republic of Iran. During debates over Iran's nuclear program, he repeatedly argued that military action should remain on the table if diplomacy failed. "If nothing changes, you have to use force," Graham said during one television interview. He also backed successive rounds of economic sanctions and consistently opposed reconciliation with Tehran. Graham's support for Israel further intensified Iranian hostility toward him. Throughout multiple regional crises, including the most recent conflict involving Iran and Israel, he defended Israel's military operations and urged Washington to maintain unwavering support for its closest Middle Eastern ally. His statements made him a frequent subject of criticism in Iranian state media, where American hawks were often portrayed as driving Washington toward broader regional conflict. Against that backdrop, Graham's final diplomatic mission carried even greater significance. None of this constitutes evidence that Graham was killed, but the plausibility can't be denied either. Within hours of his death, Russian commentators revived their long-running criticism of Graham, with several state-linked figures again labeling him a Russophobe. Iranian broadcasters also reacted with visible satisfaction, and one widely circulated television segment featured a presenter remarking that the news was so welcome, he wanted to read it twice. At the same time, conspiracy theories emerged across social media, blaming Russia, Iran, Israel, American intelligence agencies, or others. Celebration, rumors, and competing assassination possibilities. Following news of his death, Several Russian commentators openly celebrated the development. Iranian reactions were, if anything, even more striking. State media personalities smiled while reporting Graham's death. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghai, also delivered an unusually blunt statement, describing Graham as a warmonger and saying his death would not sadden any free-thinking human, adding that the angel of death is just. Such reactions reflected years of animosity. But this was nothing compared to what came next. And this single statement changed everything. Russian political philosopher Alexander Dugin, often described as one of Russia's leading nationalist ideologues, argued that if Graham had been assassinated, Iran was not the most likely suspect. Instead, Dugin suggested that Mossad would make more strategic sense. This isn't just any commentator. Dugin is the founder of the modern Eurasianist movement and author of the Fourth Political Theory. Although Western media have frequently labeled him Putin's brain or Putin's philosopher, many Russian scholars argue those titles overstate his direct influence on Kremlin decision-making. Even so, Dugin remains a prominent voice in Russian nationalist circles. His daughter, Daria Dugina, was killed in a 2022 car bombing that Russian authorities blamed on Ukrainian intelligence. His actual statement on X, formerly Twitter, read, "The sudden death of Lindsey Graham can be the black mark sent to Trump. I doubt it was Iranians. Most realistically, it was a Mossad job in order to push Trump to renew a full-scale war with Iran. It clearly means you are the next." Lindsey Graham was the shadow of Trump, his black self. Dugin's argument was explicitly geopolitical rather than investigative. Rather than accusing Iran, he argued that if Graham had been assassinated, Israel would theoretically have had the stronger strategic incentive. Interestingly, just days leading up to Graham's death, Israel had warned the United States that Iran could attempt an assassination of President Donald Trump. From there, the conversation quickly expanded beyond Dugin himself. Online commentators began drawing parallels with other politically charged deaths and assassination attempts, arguing that intelligence services often operate in ways that are difficult to prove publicly. Others rejected those comparisons entirely. History offers numerous examples of why such skepticism persists. President John F. Kennedy maintained an unusually firm position on Israel's emerging nuclear program, repeatedly pressing Israeli leaders for regular inspections of the Dimona nuclear facility. After Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson adopted a noticeably less confrontational approach toward the issue. Over the decades, that sequence of events has fueled speculation among some authors and commentators that Kennedy's Middle East policy may have provided a motive for foreign actors. Among the best known is journalist Michael Collins Piper, whose 1994 book Final Judgment argued that Kennedy's pressure on Israel over inspections of the Dimona nuclear facility provided a motive for Israeli involvement. The historical record does establish that President Kennedy repeatedly pressed Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion to allow regular international inspections of Dimona. In a letter dated May 18, 1963, Kennedy warned that continued American support for Israel could be seriously jeopardized if satisfactory inspections were not permitted. Ben-Gurion resigned less than a month later, on June 16, 1963, and his successor, Levi Eshkol, inherited the dispute. After Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson adopted a noticeably less confrontational approach toward the issue. Those events are historical facts. But of course, there has never been any concrete evidence linking Israel to the death of JFK. Then, on June 8, 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats attacked the American intelligence ship USS Liberty in international waters, killing 34 U.S. servicemen and wounding 171 others. Israel said its forces had confused the American intelligence ship with the Egyptian cargo vessel El Qusair, believing it to be an enemy ship operating near the Sinai Peninsula. Israel formally apologized, accepted responsibility for the error, and later paid compensation to the victims' families and the U.S. government. Yet many survivors, former officials, and independent researchers have never accepted the official explanation, arguing that several aspects of the attack remain difficult to reconcile with a simple identification error. Crew members consistently stated that visibility was excellent, that the 455-foot USS Liberty was flying a large American flag, replaced with an even larger holiday ensign, after the first was shot away, and that the attack continued for nearly 75 minutes, involving multiple waves of aircraft and torpedo boats, which they believe should have provided ample opportunity to correctly identify the vessel. Survivors also alleged that Israeli aircraft deliberately jammed the ship's radio frequencies, delaying distress calls, while former Secretary of State Dean Rusk later wrote that he had never been satisfied with the Israeli explanation. Decades later, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Thomas Moorer chaired an independent commission concluding that the attack had been deliberate. But these findings were never adopted by Washington. This proves one thing: foul play, even if likely to be the case, is not openly acknowledged, because doing so would only introduce more complications. Natural death, or a case that will never truly be settled. Fast forward to today, and while the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner concluded that Graham had suffered an acute aortic dissection associated with arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, the possibility remains that the medical event itself may have been caused by a toxin. The speculation draws on a series of well-known historical precedents. In 2006, former FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko, who had defected to the United Kingdom and become a vocal critic of the Kremlin, died after exposure to the radioactive substance polonium-210. A British public inquiry later concluded that the killing was probably approved by Russia's FSB leadership and President Vladimir Putin, a finding Russia rejected. In 2018, former Russian military intelligence officer Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia Skripal were poisoned in Salisbury, England, with a Novichok nerve agent. British authorities charged 2 GRU officers, while Moscow denied involvement. In 2020, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny became gravely ill during a domestic flight, and laboratories in Germany, France, Sweden, and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons reported evidence of a nerve agent. Again, Russia denied the accusation. To many cardiologists, the preliminary finding of an acute type A aortic dissection was medically plausible because the condition can strike without warning, causing an apparently healthy person to collapse within minutes. It occurs when the inner wall of the aorta tears, creating a rapidly life-threatening emergency, while reports that Graham's father had died from the same condition at a similar age suggested a possible hereditary predisposition. Yet the timing of Graham's death, coming shortly after his high-profile visit to Ukraine, ensured that medical explanations would not end public speculation. FBI Director Kash Patel announced that the Bureau would assist local authorities, emphasizing a thorough review rather than suggesting foul play. Nearly 20 FBI agents were later seen outside Graham's Washington residence, documenting the scene, coordinating with local investigators, and assisting with evidence collection as part of the standard response to the unexpected death of a sitting U.S. senator. This further fueled online theories, despite officials describing the response as standard procedure. Authorities emphasized that their presence did not indicate evidence of foul play and announced no suspects, arrests, or signs of criminal activity. President Donald Trump dismissed the speculation, saying, "If they're looking for conspiracy theories, they're wasting their time." For now, Investigators continue to wait for the final toxicology results. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.